I'm not sure how old I was, but I was really little, maybe around 6. I was with a group of people from my church having a barbecue by the river. All the kids were swimming, but I didn't know how to swim yet, so I stayed in the shallow part where the water was only waist deep. At some point, a girl came up to me and started playing. We were splashing around, but something felt off. She looked about 13, and I had no idea who she was, even though I knew everyone else there. It seemed like no one was paying attention to us. She started pushing me further and further into deeper water until I couldn't touch the bottom anymore. The whole time, she just kept laughing. My head kept going under, and every time I tried to grab onto her arms for support, she easily broke free. The current slowly pulled me away from my friends and family as I struggled to stay afloat. I was panicking, but she wouldn't stop shoving me, laughing as if it were a game. There was no way I looked like I was having fun. I tried to yell, but I could barely keep my head above water long enough to take a breath. Whenever my feet briefly touched the muddy riverbed, she would push me again. I couldn't believe she was laughing. I was sure I was going to drown, and no one seemed to notice. Of all people to step in, it was my childhood bully, Zachary. He had always been awful to me, mean and sometimes physically rough, but that day, he might have saved my life. He walked up and told her to back off, then grabbed my arm and pulled me up until I could stand again. Without a word, he ran off and continued playing with kids his own age like nothing had happened. The girl had already wandered away too. I went on playing, and like so many other things, I don't think I told anyone about it until years later. I'm pretty sure I never saw that girl again. I'd like to share a series of terrifying events from my childhood, ones that never really had a resolution. There were a few suspects, but no one was ever brought to justice. A lot of awful things have happened on my mom's property over the years, but that's another story. This is just the beginning. This part of the story takes place around 1990, during my summer break from school, though it continued for quite some time. I must have been in 2nd or 3rd grade. I was raised by my mom alone. My dad was never in the picture, so it was just the two of us until she remarried when I was about 12. Our quiet country neighborhood was mostly safe, and most of our immediate neighbors were elderly, except for one couple who had a few young adult sons around my brother's age. Other than that, there wasn't much trouble in the area. At first, there were only small signs that something was off, things being moved in the backyard. My mom had always been a bit of a paranoid conspiracy theorist, so she had a feeling something was going on, though I didn't realize it at the time. I only learned later when I overheard her talking about it. She tried to keep things hidden from me so I wouldn't be scared. Looking back, I now understand why she started sleeping in my room at night. At the time, I just thought it was fun, staying up late, watching movies, and eating snacks together. One morning, I woke up and noticed that our old wooden back door had huge chunks missing where the lock met the frame, as if someone had been chipping away at it. I pointed it out to my mom, not realizing the danger, and she instantly went pale, completely silent. I could tell something was wrong, but I was too young to understand that someone had tried to break in, either in the middle of the night or while we were out. She did what she could to fix the door and even installed a new lock. If I remember right, she also filed a police report, but they couldn't do anything. We had a big German shepherd named Munchie. He was a spoiled baby who loved raiding the fridge with me, but to a stranger, he probably looked pretty intimidating. He was my best friend and always watched over me. I still miss him to this day. For a couple of weeks, after Mom and I would go to bed, Munchie would start pacing, whining, and acting anxious. Since we lived in such a rural area with no obvious threats, my mom would often let him outside alone. One night, when he seemed especially restless, she let him out. Our house was old, built in the 50s, and we were too poor for central air, but Kentucky summers weren't too bad at night. Mom always kept the windows open, but with burglar latches. Since she was in my room with me watching a movie, we had both my bedroom windows open all the way. The back window overlooked a hill that sloped down into a wide, brush-filled bottom. Suddenly, we heard movement in the brush. Then, we heard Munchie snarling, like a wild animal. My mom ran to the window, but we couldn't see anything. The next sound was horrifying. It was as if Munchie had attacked someone, making awful noises like he was tearing into them. I started crying, terrified for him. My mom screamed for Munchie to come home. Then we heard what sounded like someone escaping, running through the brush. My mom and I rushed to the back door, calling for Munchie at the top of our lungs. When he finally came back, he was panting, bristled, and on edge. I hugged him so tight I probably nearly squeezed the life out of him. As time passed, things got worse. Being so young, I didn't realize it, but my mom was going to great lengths to protect our home. She even moved a tall dresser in front of my bedroom window that overlooked the bottom. But whoever was tormenting us wasn't giving up. One night, my mom heard strange noises coming from under the dining room windows, which faced the backyard. She turned on the security light and saw a ladder propped up against the house. It didn't seem like a real attempt to break in, more like a warning or a taunt. Maybe they thought the windows would be unlocked. Either way, they tried. Once again, my mom called the police. Once again, they did nothing. I should mention that law enforcement in our area was practically useless. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you just how ineffective they were, and still are. Then, one night, something happened that I will never forget. I was up late watching Willy Wonka while my mom had dozed off beside me. My bedroom window, the one overlooking the bottom, was in my direct line of sight. That's when I saw it. A large hand suddenly reached up and slapped my window screen. Over and over. Rapidly. I screamed. My mom woke up, but the intruder was already running. My mom had always been a dog lover, so we had several dogs and puppies around at the time. 7 little black puppies and their mother lived outside, free to roam our large property with a big doghouse for shelter. Around this time, we had to leave town for a few days, but my mom arranged for people to watch the house. She didn't think anything too awful would happen, not yet realizing just how far things would go. When we came back, all of the puppies had been killed. Their bodies were lined up in a row in the side yard, right beneath my bedroom window. The police, once again, were useless. One officer's advice was simply to teach my mom how to use her shotgun. I forgot to ask her, but I'm pretty sure she ended up sending the mother dog away to my sister's house across town. Months passed, and the harassment escalated. Then, someone took it way too far. Late one night, something hit the back of the house. My mom looked outside but didn't see anything, at least, not until morning. That's when she found a stick with a charred pine knot on it. Someone had lit it on fire and thrown it at our home. I assumed they were trying to burn us alive. And still, the police did nothing. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they knew who was behind it and just didn't care. Then, one night, Munchie went missing. He had gone outside to use the bathroom before bed, but he never came back. He always came back. But this time, he was gone. I don't even want to go into detail about what happened next because it still breaks my heart. Days later, we found him. He had been poisoned. To be honest, I could keep going. There's so much more to this story. Some of it is terrifying. Some of it is just completely ridiculous. Years later, in 2009, a long court battle began when my mom had to fight off neighbors trying to steal her land. Looking back, we started to wonder, were these the same people who tormented us all those years ago? We may never know for sure. But to whoever did this, our tormentor, if you're still out there, just know this, I wish we could meet. But I know we won't. Because you're a coward. A pathetic excuse for a person who preys on women, children, and animals. I'm 22 years old now, but we used to have a neighbor who was around 60 or 70. He passed away a few years ago, but when he was alive, he caused us endless trouble. He scratched our car, poisoned our apple trees and grass, and even set off a firework near me when I was 4, which left me temporarily deaf in one ear. And that was just the beginning. His son was a judge in our city, so anytime we tried to take legal action, the odds were stacked against us. I remember my dad often calling us from work, warning us not to be home alone. When I was little, we would have to stay at my grandma's house for safety. When I was about 6 or 7, I had recurring nightmares about a face outside our bathroom window. The window was high up, above our bathtub, too high for anyone to see in unless they climbed onto the roof of our shed, which sat directly below it in our garden. Coincidentally, the shed was right next to the fence separating our yard from the neighbors. I still remember those dreams vividly. They happened almost every other night. I never told my parents when I was a kid because we didn't really talk about things like that, so I kept it to myself. I just assumed they were nightmares and nothing more. Last year, while talking to my therapist about personal issues, I brought up those dreams, feeling like they might be connected somehow. Later that day, when I got home, my mom asked what we talked about, so I finally shared that I used to have those nightmares. I never thought they were real, until she told me something that sent chills down my spine. She said I had told her about seeing our neighbor on the shed roof multiple times. Not only that, but even my friends, when they came over, had told her they saw him up there too. They had been creeped out by it. I don't remember ever telling her, but apparently, I did, more than once. I never specifically mentioned him watching me shower, but after she told me that, something clicked. Suddenly, it felt like I remembered, like I knew it was him. It made too much sense. The realization still unsettles me. There was another incident that shook me when I was around 9 or 10. One evening, I went out onto the balcony to call my cat home, as I often did. The balcony door was in my room, so it was routine for me. But that night, something was off. I noticed a figure standing in the middle of our garden. It was already dark, so I couldn't make out details. I watched for a while, expecting him to move, but he just stood there, staring straight ahead. Thinking it might be my dad, I called out, "Dad." But the person lifted their head to look at me, and even in the dim light, I could tell, it wasn't him. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could make out the silhouette better. Panicked, I ran downstairs to tell my dad. He rushed outside, but by the time he checked, there was no one there. I went back up to my room and stepped onto the balcony again. Just as I looked toward my neighbor's house, I saw his back door closing. Not long after, maybe the next day, maybe a few days later, our grass suddenly turned brown. We later found out it had been poisoned.